My name is Ava. A year ago, my mom told me to go die after my sister lost her job. They threw me out of the house I helped them pay for, but the worst betrayal wasn't that moment. It was the quiet lies before it, the fake documents, the debt in my name, the stolen scholarship, and the email my own father sent to destroy my career. Have you ever had a family that wants you gone but won't say it out loud? I'm going to show you how I turned their lies into the proof they could never erase. I never thought I'd hear my mother tell me to go die, but she did right there at the dinner table because my sister lost her job. I sat with my hands in my lap, picking at the edge of my napkin while the stew on the table went cold. Jenna, 25, scrolled on her phone with her lips pressed tight, ignoring everyone. She'd been fired that morning from her boutique job, and nobody said a word about it, but the air was sharp with blame. Mom Carla, 53, stirred her soup like she was trying to drown it, the clink of her spoon scraping the bowl in the quiet. Dad Dennis, 55, leaned back with his coffee mug staring at the window like the darkness outside was more interesting than us. I took a small breath, keeping my eyes on the salt shaker. It felt safer than looking at Jenna's glare. Mom finally sighed loud and heavy. You know it wouldn't have been this way if someone had helped her find a real job. My fingers tightened around the napkin. I did help, I said steady. I helped her with applications. I even fixed her resume. Dad let out a dry laugh, tapping his mug on the table. You think typing on that little laptop of yours is helping? All you do is sit around playing with your computer. I've been paying part of this house since I started working, I said quietly. That's not the point, Mom snapped, her eyes sharp. Your sister needed you to help her get in somewhere, Ava. You're always acting like you're too good for us. Jenna's phone dropped onto the table with a thud. She leaned forward, her eyes narrow. If you were any use, I wouldn't have lost my job. You could have called someone. Done something. I swallowed, feeling the burn in my chest. I've done plenty, Jenna. You know I have, she laughed, cold and bitter. You? All you do is hide in your room and pretend you're busy. I looked at her, my jaw tight. I've been helping pay for the mortgage so you could stay here rent-free. Oh, so you want a medal, Jenna spat back. You think that makes you better than me? Dad shook his head, his eyes like stone. You always thought you were better than your family. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream that I never thought that I just wanted them to see I was trying. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing I said would ever matter in this house. Mom's hand slammed against the table, making the spoons rattle. You know what, Ava? Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't soften. Why don't you just leave if you're so tired of us? I felt the air pull from my lungs. Her eyes locked on mine, and I saw the hate there, deep and real. Why don't you just go die if you're so tired of this family? My heart thudded once hard. Jenna's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile like she'd been waiting to see me flinch. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I kept my breathing steady, though my hands were shaking under the table. I glanced around the kitchen, the ugly yellow walls, the crooked clock that never kept time, the stack of unpaid bills shoved under the fruit bowl. I thought about the nights I stayed up late fixing Jenna's resume while she went out drinking. I thought about the times I paid for the groceries when Dad's card got declined. I thought about every quiet moment I held my breath, hoping for them to see me. They never did. Jenna looked away, tapping her nails on the table, pretending she didn't care, but I saw the smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Dad took another sip of coffee, eyes still on the darkness outside, like I was nothing but a shadow passing through. Mom sat down again, breathing heavy, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, but there was no softness in her face. Just anger, just that look that told me I was the problem. My fingers reached into my pocket, slow, careful, and I felt the smooth glass of my phone. I pressed record, the screen hidden under the tablecloth, the red light blinking softly. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I needed proof. I needed something to remind me I wasn't making this up. They kept talking around me, Jenna whining about her manager, Mom agreeing, Dad nodding, the blame shifting back to me with every sentence. But I sat there, quiet, recording every word while the stew turned cold, while the clock ticked uselessly on the wall, while the family I thought I had made it clear they wanted me gone. And for the first time, I let myself believe them. Mom pushed her chair back, the legs screeching against the floor, and stood over me. Her eyes were red, but there was no softness there, only sharp edges, only disappointment. "You just sit there, Ava, like you're better than all of us," she hissed. "Looking down on your family, acting like we're the burden in your perfect little life." I didn't move. I didn't look up. My fingers stayed curled around my phone recording. Jenna leaned forward, her voice dripping with poison. "You think you're so smart, don't you, sitting behind your stupid computer thinking you're saving the world, but you can't even save your own family." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to swallow. "I've done what I could," I said, soft but clear. "I helped with your resume, Jenna. I helped pay the bills when no one else could." Dad let out a snort, leaning back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. "Yeah, that's what you think, huh? You think throwing a few dollars around makes you better than us." I finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "I never said I was better." Mom laughed, short and bitter. "You don't have to say it, Ava. We see it every day. The way you walk around this house like you're too good to be here." I wanted to say I was tired, that I worked all day, that I was just trying to help, but the words stuck in my throat. Jenna's nails tapped on the table. "If you really wanted to help, you'd use your fancy job to get me in somewhere that actually pays. But no, you're too busy pretending you're important." "I tried," I said, my voice breaking before I could stop it. "I tried, Jenna." Mom's eyes flashed. "Don't raise your voice at your sister." "I'm not." I closed my mouth, pressing my lips together. The silence stretched heavy and sharp, pressing against my skin until it hurt. Dad's chair creaked as he shifted. "You're ungrateful, Ava. Living here rent-free, eating our food, using our electricity, and you still act like we owe you something." I blinked, heat rising to my face. "I pay every month. I've helped with the mortgage since I got this job." "That was a choice you made," Dad snapped. "Don't think it gives you the right to talk down to us." Jenna rolled her eyes. "It's always about her, isn't it? Everything has to be about Ava and her precious job." My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. The kitchen felt too small, the air thick and stale. Mom slammed her hand on the table again, making me flinch. "If you hate it here so much, Ava, then leave." I stared at her, the edges of her face blurring for a second. "What? You heard me." Her voice was low, shaking with rage. "If you can't stand your family, then get out. Just go." Jenna's mouth curled into a cruel smile. "Yeah, maybe we'd all be better off if you just disappeared." The room tilted, my vision narrowing. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but I wouldn't let myself cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Mom's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You know what? Maybe you should just go die if you're so tired of us." The words echoed, bouncing off the yellow walls, settling into my skin like ice. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Jenna looked down at her phone, smirking, while Dad sipped his coffee, his eyes on the window, pretending he hadn't heard. I sat there, the phone still recording, my hand trembling so hard I had to grip it with my other hand to keep it steady. For a moment, I thought about standing up, screaming, throwing something, demanding they take it back. But I didn't. I just sat there, letting the silence swallow me whole. They didn't care. They didn't even look at me. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I felt it, a clean break, sharp and cold. Mom turned away, picking up her spoon, stirring her cold soup like nothing had happened. Jenna sent a text, laughing softly under her breath. Dad sighed, setting his cup down, glancing at me once before looking away, already done with me. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor, but no one looked at me. I slipped the phone into my pocket, my fingers numb, the recording still going. I looked around the kitchen one last time, the crooked clock, the peeling wallpaper, the family that had decided I was worth less than nothing. And I walked away from the table, my heart pounding, my breath shaky, but my steps steady. They didn't know it yet, but I had everything I needed. I went to my room without a word, closing the door softly behind me so they wouldn't hear it. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me, listening to the hum of the old ceiling fan, the soft drip of rain tapping against the window. My hands moved on their own, reaching for the small black backpack I kept under my bed. It was already half packed, a habit I picked up after the first time they told me to leave. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, socks, my charger, my toothbrush. I grabbed the folder of documents I kept hidden under a loose floorboard near my closet. Pay stubs, tax documents, the partial receipts I saved from paying the mortgage. Proof. I didn't have time to sort them, so I shoved them inside, zipping the bag with shaking hands. I opened my closet, pulling down my old gray hoodie, the one that still smelled like clean laundry and comfort. I slipped it on, pulling the hood up as I glanced around the room one last time. The rain picked up steady now, tapping harder against the glass. I felt it in my bones, that cold, damp air that came before a storm, before a breaking point. I stepped out into the hallway, the light from the kitchen spilling across the floor. Mom was at the sink, rinsing a dish, her shoulders stiff. Dad sat at the table reading something on his phone, pretending I wasn't there. Jenna leaned against the counter, smirking when she saw my backpack. "You running away now?" she asked, her voice sharp and small. I didn't answer her. I didn't look at Mom. I just walked to the door, gripping the handle for a second before pulling it open. The cold air hit me first, then the rain soaking through my hoodie as I stepped outside. I closed the door quietly behind me, feeling the click of the lock, the finality of it. I stood on the porch, the rain washing over me, dripping down my hair, sliding into my eyes, but I didn't wipe it away. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with water droplets sliding across it. My fingers hovered over Mason's contact. Mason, who always showed up with coffee when I was too tired to stand. Mason, who once stayed on the phone with me until 3 a.m. when I couldn't stop shaking after a panic attack. I typed, "I need a place for the night." I hit send before I could think about it. I waited, the rain soaking through my shoes, pooling at my ankles. A minute passed, then another, and my chest tightened, wondering if he would answer if I was alone now. My phone buzzed. "Be there in 15. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, slipping the phone into my pocket, stepping off the porch into the rain. I walked to the street, the wet pavement glowing under the streetlights, the sound of water rushing into the drains. Cars passed, spraying water, but I kept walking, feeling the weight of the backpack digging into my shoulders, grounding me. When I reached the end of the block, headlights turned the corner, slowing as they approached me. Mason's old blue truck rolled to a stop, the passenger window rolling down. He leaned over, eyes scanning me, worry on his face. "Get in." I opened the door, climbing in the warmth of the truck wrapping around me as I shut the door. The rain drummed on the roof, steady and soft as Mason pulled away from the curb. "You okay?" he asked, glancing at me. I nodded, pulling my hood down, wiping the water from my face. "Yeah." He didn't push, didn't ask more. He just turned the heater up, the warm air filling the space between us. The city passed by in blurry lights, the wipers swishing back and forth, the rain unending. Mason kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, close enough that I could see the small scar on his knuckle, the one he got helping me move out of my college dorm years ago. Neither of us spoke, but I felt safer in that silence than I ever did in that house. The rain followed us all the way to his apartment, tapping against the windshield like it was trying to keep me from leaving the truck. Mason parked under the glow of a single streetlight, the lot empty except for a few old cars. He turned off the engine but didn't move, his hands still on the wheel. The wipers stopped mid-swipe, leaving a streak across the glass. "You don't have to talk," he said softly, eyes still forward. "But I'm here if you want to." I nodded, pulling the backpack tighter against my chest, the straps digging into my shoulders. "I know." He finally looked at me, his eyes tired but kind, searching my face for something I wasn't ready to give. Then he pushed open his door, stepping into the rain without pulling up his hood. I opened my door, the cold air hitting me as I followed him. The rain soaked us both as we moved quickly across the lot, Mason unlocking the main door with a swipe of his key fob, holding it open for me. His apartment smelled like coffee and laundry detergent, warm and familiar in a way that made something in my chest ache. He shut the door gently, taking the keys from his pocket, hanging them on a hook near the door. "Bathrooms down the hall," he said, pointing. "Towels are in the cabinet." I slipped off my wet shoes, leaving them by the door, water dripping onto the mat. My socks squished against the floor as I walked toward the bathroom, hugging the backpack to my chest. The mirror was fogged from the warmth of the apartment, but I could still see the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hair clung to my face in wet strands. I turned on the water, letting it run hot, filling the small room with steam. I stepped into the shower, letting the water wash over me, washing away the cold, the fear, the echo of her voice telling me to die. But it didn't wash away the hurt. It didn't wash away the emptiness. When I stepped out, I found a folded sweatshirt on the sink, one of Mason's, soft and worn, smelling like him. I pulled it over my head, the sleeves too long covering my hands, but it was warm and I needed that. I found him in the kitchen pouring hot chocolate into a chipped blue mug, steam rising into the quiet room. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes taking in the sweatshirt, the way I held the sleeves. "It's not much," he said, sliding the mug toward me, "but it's warm." "Thank you," I whispered, wrapping my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into my skin. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me, but not pressing me to speak. The rain tapped against the window, the only sound between us. I took a sip, the chocolate sweet and comforting, reminding me of late nights studying in college, of Mason sneaking mugs of cocoa into the library for me when I was too tired to keep going. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't talk about them. We just stood there, letting the rain fill the silence. We couldn't. When I finished, Mason took the mug from my hands, setting it in the sink. "Couch is ready for you," he said, nodding toward the small living room. A blanket was already draped across the old couch, a pillow resting at one end. I walked over, sitting down, slowly pulling the blanket around me, letting it swallow me whole. Mason turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the small lamp near the couch glowing softly. He moved to the hallway, pausing, looking back at me. "You're safe here, Ava," he said quietly. I nodded, pulling the blanket tighter, resting my head against the arm of the couch. He turned away, disappearing down the hall, the door to his room clicking shut softly. I stared at the ceiling, the rain still falling, the room filled with the soft hum of the heater and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. In the dark, I let the words she said slip back into my mind, the way she told me to go die, the way they all let her say it, the way no one stopped her. I felt the tears slip down my cheeks, hot and silent, soaking into the pillow, but I didn't sob, didn't let the sound escape. Because for the first time, I wasn't alone when it all fell apart. The morning light crept in through the blinds, painting lines across the ceiling as I blinked awake on the couch. The blanket smelled like detergent, and Mason, the warmth, reminding me where I was, reminding me I was safe, at least for now. I sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the ache in my chest still there, but quieter than it was the night before. Mason was in the kitchen pouring coffee into 2 mugs, his hair still damp from a shower, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked over his shoulder when he saw me. "Morning," he said, sliding a mug across the counter toward me. "Hope you like it strong." I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the steam warm my cold fingers. "Thank you." He leaned against the counter, taking a sip from his own mug. His eyes were on me, steady, searching. "You slept at all?" "A little," I said, taking a sip, the bitter warmth grounding me. He nodded, looking down at his coffee. "I've been thinking, Ava." My stomach tightened, waiting. "You've been helping your parents with bills, with the mortgage, right?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Have you ever checked your credit score?" I blinked, confused. "No, why?" "Because," he said slowly, "you need to know if there's anything tied to your name that shouldn't be." My mind flashed to the envelopes I'd seen my mother hide in the kitchen drawer, the whispered conversations with Dad when they thought I was asleep. The tightness in my chest returned. "I don't know how to check that," I admitted. "I'll help you," he said, setting his mug down. "Today." We sat at his small kitchen table, Mason's laptop open between us. My hands shook as I typed in my information, the screen loading, a slow bar creeping across while my heart pounded in my ears. When the report came up, I stared at the numbers, at the red warnings I didn't understand. Mason leaned in, scrolling slowly, his jaw tightening. "Ava, do you know about these?" My eyes followed his finger as he pointed to 2 business loans opened under my name 5 years ago when I was living in San Francisco, working late nights, saving every dollar I could. I shook my head, the room tilting. "Number. I don't know what those are." "There's a payment default," he said quietly. "They're in collections." I pressed a hand to my mouth, the coffee turning sour in my stomach. "They used my name." Mason closed the laptop, his hand covering mine on the table. "We need to talk to someone about this." I looked at him, the fear in my chest twisting into something sharper, something angry. "Who?" "Jolene," he said. "She's a lawyer I went to school with. She can help." The day passed in a blur of phone calls and quiet moments. Mason drove me to Jolene's small office downtown, the heater in the car rattling as we pulled into the lot. Jolene was younger than I expected, her brown hair pulled into a tight bun, glasses perched on her nose, her eyes sharp but kind. She listened as I explained, her pen moving quickly across her notepad, nodding as I spoke. "We'll start by tracking the paper trail," she said. "See who opened these accounts, how they were tied to your name." I nodded, the weight in my chest heavy, but less crushing with Mason beside me. That night Mason made us pasta, the steam fogging the windows as the rain started again outside. We ate in quiet, the clink of forks against plates filling the silence. I looked at him across the table, his tired eyes the small smile he gave me when he caught me staring. "Thank you," I said softly. "For what?" he asked, a small laugh in his voice. "For not letting me do this alone." His smile faded, replaced by something softer, something that made my heart hurt in a different way. "You never have to do it alone, Ava." I finished my plate, washing the dishes, the warm water running over my hands as I let the silence settle around us, letting it fill the spaces where fear used to live. When the plates were stacked and the kitchen lights turned off, I lay awake on Mason's couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain against the window. The numbers from the credit report ran circles in my mind, mixing with every tight-lipped smile my mother gave me, every look Dad gave when bills came in. The silence I thought was peace was only secrets. I checked the time on my phone, 6:03 a.m., and pulled the blanket off. The apartment was quiet, the heater humming low, Mason's door still shut. I slipped on my shoes, pulled on my jacket, and grabbed my backpack. I paused at the counter, scribbling a note on the back of a receipt. "Needed to handle something. I'll be back. Ava." The cold air slapped my face as I stepped outside, the world damp and gray, the storm clouds still heavy but not breaking yet. I walked to the bus stop, my breath fogging, the streetlights flickering as the morning crept in. The ride felt endless, every turn in the road tightening the knot in my stomach. When the bus stopped near my parents' street, I stepped off, pulling my hood up, walking past the familiar cracked sidewalks, the overgrown lawns. I paused at the driveway, the house dark, and still knowing they'd be at church. It was Sunday. Church always came before family, before truth. I slipped around to the back, stepping over the loose board in the fence, the one Jenna broke when she was 15 and blamed me for. I pushed open the garage door quietly, the hinges creaking, the smell of oil and old paint thick in the air. I moved to the workbench, reaching under it to the small safe Dad kept hidden behind boxes of old tax papers. I knelt, pulling out the safe, my hands shaking as I punched in the code I had memorized years ago, the birthday of their wedding anniversary. The lock clicked open. Inside were stacks of envelopes, papers, folders crammed with receipts and statements. I dug through them, pulling out papers one by one, scanning the headers, the dates. Then I found it. A refinancing document for the house, my name scribbled next to Dad's in a signature that looked almost like mine, but not enough. The date, 5 years ago, when I was in San Francisco working double shift, saving for my own place. I swallowed, pulling it closer, reading every line, seeing how they had tied me to the mortgage without my knowledge. I found another envelope addressed to me, unopened, from the university where I won the scholarship. My fingers tore it open, the letter stating the disbursement of $15. The check made out in my name. Gone. Cashed. Used. I felt like the air had been punched out of me, the edges of my vision blurring, the paper crumpling under my fingers. I took a deep breath, pulling out my phone, snapping photos of every page, every signature, every letter. My hands were shaking so badly the photos blurred, and I had to force myself to slow down. Each click of the camera felt like another crack in the lie they built around me. I opened my cloud drive, creating a new folder. Proof, and uploaded every image, watching the progress bar move, needing to see it complete, needing it to exist somewhere safe. I slipped the papers back, locking the safe, sliding it behind the boxes, leaving everything as it was, like I had never been there. My heart was hammering, the blood loud in my ears as I stood, my knees stiff, my legs trembling. I stepped toward the garage door, pulling it open, letting in the cold morning air. That's when I saw it. Headlights flashed across the driveway, cutting through the mist, the engine rumbling as the car pulled in, stopping inches from the door. The lights stayed on, bright and blinding, trapping me in their glare. The driver's door opened slowly, the creak loud in the quiet morning. And Dennis stepped out, closing the door softly, his eyes locking on mine, his face unreadable in the glow of the headlights. He stepped closer, the gravel crunching under his boots, the headlights casting long shadows across the garage floor. "What the hell are you doing here, Ava?" His voice was calm, too calm, like the air before a tornado. I tightened my grip on my phone, slipping it into my jacket pocket. "I'm taking back what's mine." His eyes narrowed, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "You think you can just walk in here, snoop through my things? They aren't yours," I snapped, my voice shaking but clear. "You forged my name. You took money that wasn't yours. You tied me to your debts." His hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the garage door, slamming it shut behind him with a heavy thud that made me flinch. The light from the headlights cut off, leaving us in the dim glow of the single bulb above the workbench. "You ungrateful little brat," he hissed, pulling out his phone, pressing the screen before lifting it to his ear. "Carla, your daughter, is here stealing from us." I could hear my mother's voice crackling on the other end, high and sharp, but I couldn't make out the words. Dennis lowered the phone, switching to speaker. "You're a thief," Ava, Carla's voice spat through the small speaker. "After everything we've done for you, you sneak in like a criminal." I felt my breath catch, my chest burning. "Done for me? You stole my scholarship. You tied me to your mortgage. You put loans in my name." Dennis's face darkened, stepping closer until I could see the lines on his forehead, the coldness in his eyes. "Watch your mouth." "I'm done watching," I said, stepping back, but not far, refusing to let him corner me. His hand twitched, rising fingers curling into a fist, the threat clear. For a moment the world slowed, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out everything, the memory of his hand slamming against the table, the fear of waiting for it to hit me now. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Then the roar of an engine broke through the silence, headlights flooding the garage, a door slamming shut. "Get away from her." Mason's voice cut through the air, steady, cold, the kind of cold that made me want to fall apart and hold on at the same time. Dennis turned, his eyes narrowing as Mason stepped into the garage, his jaw tight, his hands at his sides but ready. "This isn't your business," Dennis growled. Mason's eyes flicked to me, then back to Dennis. "It is now." Dennis lunged, grabbing for Mason's jacket, but Mason moved faster, shoving him back. Dennis stumbled, crashing into the metal shelves behind him, tools clattering to the ground, the sound sharp and final. "Get out," Dennis yelled, pushing himself up, but Mason was already moving toward me, his hand wrapping around my wrist. "Let's go, Ava." I let him pull me, my legs moving, my breath coming in fast, the door swinging open, the cold morning air rushing in as we stepped outside. Behind us I could hear Dennis cursing, the sound of something breaking, the rage boiling over. As Mason pulled me toward the car, I looked back for a moment, seeing the front door of the house open. Carla standing there in her robe, her hair a mess, her eyes empty. She didn't say a word, she didn't stop us. She just watched the door closing slowly behind her as we stepped into the morning light. Mason opened the passenger door, guiding me, and his hand firm on my back. My legs felt weak, my heart pounding so loud it was all I could hear. Mason slammed the door, walking around to the driver's side, sliding in and starting the engine with a low rumble that filled the tense silence. As we pulled away, the tires crunching on the gravel, I looked back one last time. Dennis stood in the open garage, a hand pressed to his shoulder where he hit the shelves, his eyes following us, cold, sharp, unforgiving. He didn't yell this time, he didn't have to. Mason's hands tightened on the wheel as we turned onto the street, the sun just starting to climb, the sky gray and heavy, the world too quiet for what had just happened. I pulled my knees to my chest, pressing my forehead against them, trying to breathe, trying to stop the shaking in my hands. Mason glanced at me, his jaw tight. "You, okay?" I lifted my head, my voice raw. "Number." He nodded, once eyes back on the road. "Good. You shouldn't be." The words hit me harder than I expected, pulling the air from my lungs. "I can't believe he tried to hit you," Mason said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's done it before," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Mason's head snapped toward me, his eyes dark. "Ava." I looked out the window, the houses passing in a blur, tears burning but not falling. "He's never hit me," I said, correcting myself, my voice shaking. "But he's come close. And I always thought if I stayed quiet it wouldn't happen." Mason's grip on the wheel tightened again, his jaw working. "That's not on you." I didn't answer because I didn't know how to believe him. We drove in silence, the engine humming, the tires humming on the road, the air thick with everything we couldn't say. When we reached a red light, Mason exhaled, his shoulders dropping. "They're not going to stop, Ava." I looked at him, my chest tightening. "What? They're not going to stop taking from you," he said, turning to face me fully, his eyes steady, unwavering. "Not until you take it back." I swallowed hard, the words sinking in heavy and true. "I don't know how," I said, my voice small. "Yes, you do," Mason replied. "You've been gathering proof. You've been collecting everything. Now it's time to use it." The light turned green, but Mason didn't move, the cars behind us honking, the sound distant, unimportant. "You have to reclaim what's yours," he said, his voice low, firm, the kind that made it clear he wasn't asking. I looked into his eyes, seeing the reflection of myself there, tired, scared, but still here. The honking grew louder, and Mason finally pressed the gas, the car moving forward, the road opening up in front of us, long and uncertain. I didn't know where we were going, but for the first time I knew I couldn't go back. We pulled into Mason's complex, the engine ticking as it cooled, the sky now clear but cold, the air sharp against my skin as I stepped out. I carried my bag up the stairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. My legs were sore, my shoulders tight, my mind buzzing with everything Dennis said, everything Mason said. Inside, the apartment was quiet, warm, safe in a way that made me want to collapse. Mason locked the door behind us, setting his keys on the counter, watching me without saying a word. I dropped my bag by the couch and pulled out my old laptop, the one I kept backed up for emergencies. Today felt like an emergency. I set it on the coffee table, the screen lighting up, the fan whirring, the familiar password clicking under my fingers as I logged in. My inbox opened, the flood of old notifications popping up, a snapshot of a life I barely remembered living. Mason sat on the floor across from me, his back against the couch, close enough that I could feel the warmth from him. "What are we looking for?" he asked. "Proof," I said softly, my fingers moving across the trackpad. Anything they touched. I searched for the old email I had drafted for Jenna, the apology I wrote late one night after she called me crying, saying she was about to lose her job for bullying a coworker. I spent hours making it sound sincere, balanced, professional, hoping it would save her. I remembered her promising she would send it. I remembered her saying thank you, saying she owed me. But as I scrolled, my stomach dropped. The email was gone. In its place was a thread I didn't recognize, an email sent from Jenna's account, but edited, the language twisted, claiming the situation was a result of emotional instability from a mentally unwell sibling. I clicked, reading every line, my vision blurring, the words sinking in like ice. "Mason," I whispered, "they changed it. They blamed me." He leaned closer, his eyes scanning the screen. "Can you check the IP logs?" My hands shook as I opened the security log, clicking through the history, the login location highlighted. Home. My parents' house. "They logged in from their house," I said, my voice cracking. "They used my laptop, my email." Mason's jaw tightened, his hand reaching out, resting on mine, steadying the tremor in my fingers. "They can't hide this." I shook my head, the tears finally slipping free. "They ruined me. I lost that job because of them. They told everyone I was unstable." Mason's eyes didn't leave mine. "We'll prove it." I closed the email, opening another folder I had archived from when I left my last job, pulling up the anonymous tip that had been sent to HR, claiming I was emotionally unstable and a liability. I clicked the metadata, my breath catching as the IP address appeared. It matched the same location, the same house, the same people. The betrayal settled into my bones, heavy and deep, pressing down on every breath, every heartbeat. I felt Mason's hand tighten on mine, grounding me as my world cracked open again. "They destroyed my name," I said, my voice shaking. "My career, my reputation, everything." Mason's eyes were fierce, his grip unyielding. "Then we take it back." I closed the laptop lid gently, the soft click echoing too loud in the small apartment. My hands stayed on the cover, pressing down like if I let go everything would spill out and drown me. Mason stood, walking to the kitchen, pouring water into a glass, setting it in front of me. "Drink." I took it, sipping, the coolness sharp against my dry throat, grounding me for a moment. I watched him pace, his hand running through his hair, his jaw tight. "They're not going to stop," I said quietly, staring at the water. "Even if I leave. Even if I stay silent. They won't, he agreed, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. But you're not going to stay silent anymore. I nodded, setting the glass down, opening the laptop, again the glow lighting up Mason's face in the dim room. I pulled up the folder, proof, clicking through each file, each timestamp, each IP address. Each betrayal. They planned this. I whispered, a cold certainty sinking into my bones. Jenna lost control at work and they needed someone to blame. Someone to take the fall. And your mother made sure it wasn't her precious baby, Mason said, his voice bitter. My chest tightened as I pulled up the apology email again, the one I wrote for Jenna, carefully worded to protect her from being fired. The one that was replaced with poison. I scrolled down, seeing the final signature. Sent with concern by Jenna Williams' family. I stared, my hands trembling. They used me. They used my words and then they rewrote them to destroy me. Mason moved closer, pulling up a chair, sitting beside me. We can prove it was them. I shook my head, tears slipping down my cheeks again. I can't believe my own mother would do this. You can, Mason said softly. Because you've seen what she does to keep Jenna safe. I closed my eyes, remembering the nights Jenna would come home drunk, screaming, breaking things, and how I would be the one blamed for provoking her. Remembering the time Mom told me it was my fault, Dad punched a hole in the wall because I pushed him too far. I opened my eyes, the tears stopping, replaced by a cold, clear focus. We need to cross-reference everything I said, my voice stronger. The dates, the accounts, the payments they forced under my name. We will, Mason said, nodding. And we'll give it all to Jolene. I clicked into my old cloud backups, pulling up statements from my old job, looking for the week the anonymous email was sent. I found the HR email the exact day they put me on probation without telling me why. It was the same day, I said, showing Mason. They sent the tip and I lost my client project. They've been bleeding you dry. Mason said, his eyes dark. I leaned back in the chair, the exhaustion hitting me like a wave, but I didn't close the laptop. I've spent years trying to make them proud, I said, almost to myself. And they spent years making sure I'd never be free. Mason reached over, closing my laptop gently, but his hand stayed on mine, warm, steady. You will be free, Ava, he said, his voice low, calm, certain. We'll make sure of it. I looked up, meeting his eyes, seeing the reflection of myself there, not as the broken girl my family saw, but as someone worth fighting for. I squeezed his hand, my voice calm, my decision clear. It's time they learn they can't erase me from this life. I opened my laptop, the glow steady, the cursor blinking like it was daring me to move. I pulled the files from the proof folder, aligning them on the screen. The audio recording from the night they told me to go die. The scans of the forged mortgage documents. The scholarship letter I never saw until it was too late. I added the metadata screenshots, the IP logs, each one a nail in the coffin of the lies they built around me. Mason sat across from me, silent, watching the tension in the room, sharp but not suffocating. It was the tension before a storm, the kind that meant change was coming. I opened a new email draft, my hands steady, the fear replaced by something colder, cleaner. Subject: clarification and evidence of defamation and identity. Misuse recipients, HR Jenna's company. HR at my former company, financial aid office at my university. I typed the words, flowing, each sentence a piece of truth I refused to let them bury. I explained the forged documents, the loans opened in my name, the scholarship funds taken. I attached the recording of the dinner, the moment my mother told me to disappear, the moment they all stayed silent. I ended the email simply. This is not an apology. This is clarity. I hit send, the whoosh of the outgoing email louder than any scream I could have given them. Mason let out a slow breath. You did it. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle, feeling it wrap around me, not as fear but as a promise. We drove downtown that afternoon, the winter sky overcast, the air cold as it bit at my cheeks. Mason parked near the small podcast booth I had rented, the kind people used for cheap recordings and college projects. He carried my laptop and the small external drive, handing them to me at the door. His hand brushed mine, his eyes meeting mine. You don't have to rush, he said quietly. I'm not, I replied, tightening my grip on the handle. I'm ready. Inside, the booth smelled like stale coffee and dust, the foam walls scratched from years of use. I set up my laptop, plugging in the drive, checking the mic levels, the red light blinking softly. I sat placing the headset over my ears, pulling in a slow breath-pressing record. My name is Ava Williams. I began, my voice clear, steady, echoing back into my ears. This is for the record, for the truth, for the years I spent being silent. I spoke, telling it all. The loans, the forged documents, the scholarship money stolen to pay for Jenna's debts, the anonymous emails that ruined my job, the betrayal that cut deeper than any scream. I ended the recording with the sound of my own breathing, strong, calm. I uploaded the file to my cloud, labeling it Restoration Ava Williams, adding the timestamp, backing it up twice, ensuring it could never be erased. When I stepped out, Mason was there leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, a small smile pulling at the corner of his lips. "You sounded strong," he said. "I am strong," I answered. We drove back, stopping by Jolene's office, handing over a printed copy of the time-stamped files. Jolene flipped through them, nodding, her eyes sharp. "I'll send the cease and desist letters," she said, "and file the paperwork to reclaim your name on the mortgage." I nodded, my shoulders lighter than they had been in years. That evening, I drafted a letter with Jolene's guidance addressed to my parents, outlining every document, every debt, every falsehood they had built on my name. At the bottom, I signed my name clearly, firmly, without hesitation. I sealed the envelope, pressing it closed, feeling the finality in the glue sticking to my fingers. I placed it on Jolene's desk, meeting her eyes. "Send it," I said. She nodded, sliding it into her briefcase. I stepped out into the cold, the wind sharp, the sky darkening, but the air felt clean, like I could finally breathe. For the first time, I felt like the story was mine to tell. I walked down the steps from Jolene's office, feeling the chill in the air bite at my cheeks, but I didn't pull my jacket tighter. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel awake. Mason was waiting by the car, leaning against the door, watching me with that look that was equal parts relief and quiet pride. "Ready?" he asked as I reached him. I nodded, pulling in a breath that didn't feel heavy for once. "Yeah." We drove in silence, the city lights reflecting off the windshield, the world feeling bigger and closer all at once. I kept my hand resting on the folder in my lap, the stamped documents inside warm from my grip. Back at the apartment, I placed the folder on the table, opening my laptop and pulling up the recording from the podcast booth, the timestamp glowing in the corner of the file. It was done. The truth was out there, and they couldn't take it back. I opened my email, attaching the recording, the forged mortgage documents, the stolen scholarship receipt, the screenshots of the IP logs from the defamation emails. I hovered over the send button, feeling the fear crawl up my spine, the echo of my mother's voice in my mind telling me to stay quiet, to keep the peace. I pressed send. The whoosh was soft, but it felt like thunder. Mason stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder, steadying me as the screen refreshed. "Who did you send it to?" he asked. "HR at Jenna's company. HR at my old company. The financial aid office at my university," I said, my voice even. "And Jolene." He squeezed my shoulder once before letting go. "Good." That night, I lay on the couch, unable to sleep, the glow of the city outside, casting shifting shadows on the ceiling. Every breath felt like it was pulling me closer to something I didn't have words for. Freedom. I opened my phone, checking the backup files again, ensuring every document was safe, every recording, timestamped, every piece of proof, living in multiple clouds and drives. They couldn't erase me anymore. In the morning, Mason drove me back to the podcast booth, the one we had rented for a few hours the week before. I needed to record a final statement, something clear, something that would live beyond rumors and family whispers. I sat in the small booth, the mic closed, the headset snug against my ears, hearing my own breath as I exhaled. "My name is Ava Williams." I began, steady, calm, louder than I had ever allowed myself to be. "I am reclaiming my story." I laid it all out, clear and precise. The scholarship they stole, the loans they opened in my name, the forged mortgage documents, the emotional abuse, the threats, the manipulation, the defamation. The truth was not loud, but it was sharp, each word deliberate, each breath a promise that I would not be silenced again. When I finished, I sat in the silence, hearing my heart beat in the headphones. I pressed stop, saving the file, uploading it immediately, adding it to the chain of proof that was no longer just mine, but now evidence, reality, a record they could never edit. As I stepped out of the booth, Mason was there in the hallway, His arms crossed, his eyes soft as they met mine. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I can finally breathe," I said, allowing a small smile to pull at the corners of my lips. He returned it, a rare warm smile that made the cold outside feel far away. We drove home under a sky that was too blue for winter, the sun sharp, the air cold, but I rolled the window down anyway, letting it wash over me, letting the noise of the world in, unafraid for the first time. I spent the afternoon reviewing documents with Jolene over a call, finalizing the cease and desist letter, the mortgage reclamation, the demand for acknowledgement of the debts and scholarship funds. Every page I signed felt like a piece of my life being returned to me one by one. Jolene's voice came through the speaker, calm and professional, but with a warmth that surprised me. "They're going to try to reach out," she said. "Be ready." I closed my eyes, nodding even though she couldn't see me. "I am," I said. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the room in gold and blue, I sat with Mason on the couch, the quiet between us, not heavy but full. We didn't need to say anything. Everything was already in motion. 3 days later, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my chest tighten, but I didn't hesitate. I answered. Carla's voice came through, sharp and cold but shaking around the edges. "You're destroying this family, Ava." I held the phone tighter, letting the silence stretch, letting her hear the calm in my breathing. She was waiting for me to say something, to back down, to apologize like I always had. "Not this time." "No," I said, my voice even. "I'm telling the truth." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by a pause so heavy I could almost see her pressing her hand to her chest, trying to find words. "We just want to fix this," she said, finally, her voice softer but strained. "Can you come for dinner Sunday? The family will be there. We can talk." I closed my eyes, letting the cold silence of the room remind me who I was now. "I'll be there," I said, ending the call before she could add another layer of guilt. Sunday came colder, the wind sharp as Mason drove me toward the house I once thought was home. My fingers tapped against my bag, the folder inside heavier than anything I had ever carried. "Remember," Mason said as he pulled up across the street, turning the engine off, "you don't owe them softness." I met his eyes, nodding. "I know." I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots, the porch light glowing too warm, too fake against the gray sky. As I reached the door, I heard laughter inside, brittle and forced. I walked in without knocking. The smell of roasted meat, garlic, and too sweet wine hit me, pulling at old memories I refused to let weaken me now. The living room was full, every seat taken, cousins I hadn't seen in years pretending not to watch as I walked through. Jenna was there, perched on the arm of a chair, her hair perfect, her smile tight. She slid off the chair, walking up to me, arms open. "There's my big sister," she said, hugging me with arms that felt like rope. I stood stiff, letting her hold on, then stepped back. Her eyes were glassy, her hands trembling just slightly. "Let's get you a plate," Carla said from the kitchen, her voice bright, too bright. She stepped forward, kissing my cheek, the scent of her perfume sharp enough to make my eyes sting. Dennis stood at the head of the table, carving meat, his face set in that calm, controlled expression that used to terrify me as a child. We sat, plates passed, glasses filled, small laughter bubbling up in the spaces where silence tried to creep in. No one mentioned the emails, the stolen scholarship, the loans, the lies. Dennis raised his glass. "Family forgives," he said, looking at me, eyes cold even as his mouth curved into a smile. "That's what we do here." I reached into my bag, pulling out 3 white envelopes, placing them quietly on the table in front of Dennis, Carla, and Jenna. The paper was too bright under the dining room light, every eye at the table flicking toward them. Carla's smile faltered. "What's this?" she asked, her fingers twitching as they hovered over the envelope. "Proof," I said, my voice steady, each letter landing like a stone in the quiet. "Of what you did." Jenna's hand reached for her envelope, her fingers shaking as she opened it, eyes scanning the documents. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Dennis's jaw worked as he flipped through the papers, the recording device sliding onto the table, bumping against his glass. A cousin stood at the far end, his face red, anger dripping from his words. "You're humiliating this family," he spat, his hand slamming onto the table. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back, the scrape loud enough to silence the room. "I'm reclaiming the truth," I said, my eyes scanning every face that dared to look up. "I don't need your permission." I turned, walking out of the dining room, each step deliberate, each breath steady, the murmur of voices behind me rising, but not enough to make me turn back. The hallway felt too small as I moved through it, past the pictures on the walls, the false smiles, the memories curated to hide the cracks. I opened the front door, the cold air biting at my face, and stepped outside, letting it wake every nerve in my body as I crossed the threshold I once called home. I stepped onto the porch, the wood cold beneath my boots, the wind cutting through the thin fabric of my jacket as I pulled the door closed behind me, soft but firm. For a moment, I stood there, letting the cold settle into my skin, reminding me I was alive, reminding me that the girl who used to flinch at raised voices was gone. I could still hear them inside, the clink of glasses, the forced laughter, the sharp hush as they realized I had walked out. I imagined Dennis standing at the head of the table, his jaw tight, Carla wringing her hands, Jenna pretending to comfort her while her eyes darted to the envelopes I left behind. I walked down the steps, each one steady, each one mine. The gravel crunched under my feet as I crossed the yard, the lights from the windows casting long shadows across the frost-covered grass. Mason was waiting across the street, leaning against the car, his arms crossed, his eyes on me. Under the glow of the streetlight, I saw him push off the car, taking a few steps toward me, stopping just before the curb. We didn't say anything as I reached him. His eyes searched mine, and whatever he saw there made his shoulders relax, the tension slipping away as he nodded once. Behind me, the front door swung open, the screen door slamming against the frame with a sharp crack that echoed down the quiet street. Ava Dennis's voice roared, the cold air carrying it to us. I didn't turn around. "You think you can just walk away from this family?" he yelled, stepping onto the porch, his silhouette large and unsteady under the porch light. "You think you can embarrass us like this and leave?" Mason's eyes flickered to me, waiting for a sign, but I shook my head slightly. This was mine to finish. I turned slowly, meeting Dennis's eyes across the yard. "I'm not walking away from family," I said, my voice calm, carrying in the cold air. "I'm walking away from the lies." His face twisted, the calm cracking the anger he always kept hidden, boiling over. "You're nothing without this family," he shouted, his hand gesturing wildly, his face red. I took a breath, letting it out slowly, feeling the cold bite at my lungs. "No," I said, my voice even. "You're nothing without someone to blame." His mouth opened, but no words came out, the fight draining from him as he stood there shaking, realizing he had nothing left to threaten me with. A movement caught my eye, and I saw Carla behind him, clutching the edge of the door, her face pale, her eyes wide, her lips pressed together to keep from saying anything. I turned away, walking back to Mason, each step cutting through the fear that had kept me silent for too long. When I reached him, he opened the car door, his hand brushing mine, grounding me without words. I slid into the seat, the warmth of the car wrapping around me, replacing the cold with something steady, something real. As Mason started the engine, the headlights cutting across the yard, Dennis's voice came one last time, sharp and cracking. "You will regret this." "Ava," he yelled, his words echoing as Mason pulled away, the car rolling forward, the road opening up in front of us. I didn't look back. Mason drove us into the city, the lights blurring past as I pressed my forehead against the cold window, letting the silence settle around us. My chest felt tight, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something cleaner, like the air after a hard rain, leaving space for something new to grow. We didn't talk much on the drive back, the hum of the tires and the soft rhythm of Mason's breath beside me grounding me in the quiet. I closed my eyes, letting the memory of Dennis's last words fade into the distance like static from a station I no longer needed to tune into. The next morning, I woke up in Mason's apartment, the soft scent of coffee pulling me into the day. He had left a cup on the nightstand, steam curling into the cool air, a quiet reminder that I was not alone in this new beginning. I sat up slowly, the blanket falling around my shoulders, the weight of everything we had done settling into me, solid and unshakable. I spent the next few weeks looking for a place of my own, something small, something quiet, something that didn't carry the echoes of slammed doors and words meant to break me. I found it on the east side of Austin, a studio with creaky floors and a window that caught the morning light just right. It smelled like fresh paint and clean air, like the promise of something I didn't have to share with anyone who didn't see me. Moving in was slow, deliberate. Each box I opened felt like a piece of myself I was finally reclaiming. My books, my grandmother's mug, the old lamp I'd kept since college. I hung my clothes in the tiny closet, lined up my shoes, folded my blankets, each small task a quiet rebellion against every time they tried to erase me. One afternoon, while folding laundry on the couch, my phone buzzed. Jolene's name lit up the screen, and for a brief second I felt the old panic rise before I pushed it down and answered. "It's done," she said, her voice warm, carrying a smile I could almost hear. "Your name is back on the deed. They can't touch the house without you now." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, sinking back into the cushions, the sun warming my face through the window. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes but refusing to fall. "It's not about the house," Ava Jolene said softly. "It's about knowing you were never invisible." I closed my eyes, letting those words fill the small apartment, letting them settle into the walls, into me. A few days later, an email came from my old company, the subject line clean and direct: "We owe you an apology." I opened it, reading each line carefully, feeling the weight of the past lift with every word. They admitted they had received an anonymous tip about me, questioning my stability, hinting at family issues, and they believed it without asking me. They cleared my record, reopened opportunities I thought I'd lost, and said if I ever wanted to work with them again, the door was open. I didn't rush to respond. I closed the laptop, letting the words hang in the air, letting them remind me that what they tried to take from me was mine to reclaim. Jenna lost her job soon after. HR discovered the discrepancies in her file, the emails sent under my name, the small lies that piled into bigger ones until they collapsed under their own weight. A cousin texted me saying Jenna was blaming me for everything, saying I ruined her life. I stared at the message for a long moment, the cursor blinking. Then I typed, "I didn't ruin her life. I reclaimed mine." I pressed send and put the phone down, letting the quiet of my new home remind me that I was safe. Every morning Mason still brought coffee. Sometimes he stayed leaning against the counter, watching me with that steady, quiet warmth that made me feel seen. Other mornings he left before sunrise, leaving the coffee waiting, the steam curling up like a promise I no longer needed to doubt. One evening, I hung a small frame on the wall above my desk. Inside it, on simple white paper, black letters spelled out what I needed to see every day: "Don't let them write your version." I stepped back, letting the words settle into the room, letting them claim the space the way I had learned to claim my own existence. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need forgiveness. I only needed to know I was here, that I was not invisible, that no one could erase me again. And now they knew it too. I turned away from the frame, the soft hum of the city drifting through the open window, the scent of rain in the air as dusk settled over Austin. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, and I walked over, pouring water into a chipped mug I'd carried through every move, every false start, every quiet escape. The steam curled against my face, warm and real, grounding me in this space I had claimed for myself. Mason knocked once before stepping in, holding a small paper bag from the bakery down the street, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. He set the bag on the counter, pulling out 2 croissants, placing one on a plate for me. "Still can't cook," he said, a small smile on his lips. I rolled my eyes, but it made me smile too, the kind that didn't feel forced, the kind that reminded me what it was to be seen without expectation. We ate quietly, the only sounds the occasional honk from the street below, the creak of the old building settling as the rain picked up outside. Mason washed his plate, leaving mine for me, wiping his hands on a towel before turning to lean against the counter. "How does it feel?" he asked, his eyes soft, watching me carefully. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest before answering. "Like I can breathe," I said honestly. "Like it's finally quiet." He nodded, pushing his hands into his pockets. "You earned this, Ava." I set the mug down, meeting his eyes. "No," I said. "I reclaimed it." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind that told me he understood. That evening, I pulled out my laptop, settling onto the small couch by the window, the rain tapping against the glass in a steady rhythm. I opened the email from my old company, reading the apology one last time before archiving it, letting it become what it was: a confirmation, not a need. My phone buzzed with a message from a cousin I hadn't blocked yet. "They're saying you ruined everything," it read. I stared at the screen, the rain blurring the lights of the city beyond the window. I typed back, "I didn't ruin it. I told the truth." And I turned the phone over, letting it buzz one last time before the silence took its place. I spent the next days working, reclaiming the pieces of my career they tried to tarnish. Clients returned. Projects reopened. Emails came in not with apologies, but with respect, with recognition of the work I had always done. I walked to the corner market in the mornings, letting the cold air wake me, letting the sunrise remind me that I was here alive, building a life no one could take from me again. Jolene called, confirming the last of the filings, the documents that proved my name, my contributions, my place. "They can't sell without you," she said. "They can't erase you." I laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar but welcome. "Thank you," I said. At night, Mason would sit on the floor by the window, guitar in hand, strumming softly while I finished up emails or read a book. The city lights would glow, the traffic hum, filling the quiet spaces with life. Sometimes he would look up, catching my eyes, the unspoken promise there that I wasn't alone. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn that. One morning, I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the city wake below me, the people moving, the buses passing, the light catching on the glass of the buildings. I pressed a hand to the window, letting the cold glass remind me how far I had come, how hard I had fought for this simple, quiet moment. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need them to understand. They knew I existed now. And that was enough. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments.